The President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, and I want to thank you all for joining us this morning for our annual briefing. And I'm really pleased, as I was talking to a few of you, that we didn't bring snow with us for this meeting this time. I think 7 of the last 10 briefings we've had snow the day we did it, so I'm pleased we're not culpable for the snows you've been having or the ones that may be coming this time. Last year at this time, we had lost one nuclear plant, the Kewaunee plant, Wisconsin, to adverse market conditions. We knew the Vermont Yankee plant would close at the end of 2014 for the same reasons, and we also knew that other nuclear generating assets in Illinois and in other competitive markets were at risk. As we gather here in February 2015, Vermont Yankee did close down permanently last month. Like Kewaunee, Vermont Yankee was a well-managed, solid performer that fell victim to a market that did not compensate the facility for the attributes it provided. And we still have other nuclear assets in Illinois and other competitive markets at risk. It sounds like the same story, but it's not. This year is different. This year begins with something that we did not have at this time last year. It's recognition of the value of these assets. 2014 was a year when many people in the policy community, in the federal and state governments, in the regional transmission organizations, and elsewhere in the electric power industry reawakened to the value of America's nuclear generating assets. The first step towards addressing the problem is gaining recognition that a problem exists, and I believe we took the first step in 2014. Our challenge going forward is to turn intellectual recognition of value into real monetary recognition, and we haven't gotten there yet. Here is what we plan to cover this morning. We'll start by discussing the business and policy environment, particularly as it relates to our merchant assets, then recap some of the major events and activities from last year, and close with some thoughts about 2015 and beyond. When we spoke to you last year about the economic stress facing some of our nuclear plant operating in competitive markets, we suggested several rather simple and basic propositions to help frame the issues. First, we suggested to you that there was nothing wrong with any of the plants at risk. Kewaunee, Vermont Yankee, and others at risk were all solid performers. All of them highly reliable plants with high capacity factors and relatively low generating costs. When Vermont Yankee closed last month, it had just completed a 630-day continuous run. Second, we suggested to you that it made no economic sense to allow these facilities to close because replacement generating capacity, when needed, would likely produce more costly electricity, fewer jobs that would pay less, and more pollution. Third, we suggested that goods and services will only be produced in a competitive market when they are priced and valued in the market. We are accustomed to thinking of electricity as an undifferentiated bulk commodity. That's a mistake. Every kilowatt hour of electricity on the grid has a unique pedigree or set of attributes, and all resources are not equal. Demand resources that can be called only on limited occasions for short periods of time do not have the same value as a generating plant, and all generating capacity is not the same. Each source of electricity has its own set of attributes that provide varying degrees of value to the grid, and those attributes must be reflected in the total compensation provided to each generator. Nuclear generating capacity has its own set of attributes, starting with productions of large quantities of electricity around the clock safely and reliably. Nuclear power plants have fuel on site and will run when needed. They also provide price stability and portfolio value and clean air compliance value. All of these attributes are valuable. Most are not paid for. Fourth and finally, we suggested that sustainable market design demands consideration of all the factors that constitute a robust and resilient market. Among other things, those factors include short-term price, long-term price stability, the value of fuel and technology diversity, environmental factors, and others. Short-run cost is an important and necessary metric, but solving this complex equation for that one variable only, lowest possible short-run electricity price, will not produce a reliable, resilient, and affordable system for the long term. Our industry devoted substantial resources to broadcasting these basic propositions widely across the country in 2014. NEI and our companies used their own communication platforms and programs, and we created a new campaign called Nuclear Matters to raise awareness of the significant challenges facing our nation's largest source of carbon-free electricity. Two well-regarded political figures chair this campaign, former Indiana Governor and United States Senator Evan Bayh, a Democrat, and former New Hampshire Governor and Senator Judd Gregg, a Republican. Although we know the Nuclear Matters campaign and our other advocacy programs have had a significant impact, two other events last year had as much, if not more, impact on the policymaking process. One was the succession of 5 periods of extreme cold in January, February, and March that we refer to collectively as the polar vortex. The other was the proposal by the Obama administration to reduce carbon emissions from operating coal-fired power plants under Section 111D of the Clean Air Act. Both focused attention squarely on the value of our nuclear power plants. One served as a reminder that assured fuel on site, or in our case, 12 to 24 months of fuel in the reactor core, is a very valuable attribute. EPA's proposed 111D rule shone a bright light on the fact that nuclear energy is our largest carbon-free source for electricity, and that any credible program to reduce carbon emissions would be seriously compromised if we lose operating plants. As you know, the polar vortex uncovered some significant vulnerabilities in the electric supply system. Through it all, nuclear units performed admirably, on average running at capacity factors in the mid-90% range. Since last winter, we have seen significant movement on the part of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and in a number of regional transmission organizations to address some of the underlying problems. FERC had already opened in September 2013 a proceeding to examine capacity markets in the eastern RTOs. FERC then convened a technical conference in April to explore the vulnerabilities laid bare by the polar vortex and to discuss lessons learned and whether reforms were necessary to preclude any repetition. All of us recognize that capacity market design is important, but we also recognize that most of the revenue, 75% or more, is in the energy markets for nuclear power plants. Prices in the energy markets are being suppressed in various ways, either because of out-of-market actions by the RTOs, which compromise price formation, or as a consequence of state and federal mandates and out-of-market revenues. Allowing market participants to reflect out-of-market revenues in their bids in the energy markets distorts and suppresses competitive price signals. In addition, in the energy markets, the RTOs frequently use out-of-market dispatch. As a result, the marginal resources offer is not reflected in the energy market's clearing price. Instead, it is uplifted, so the price paid for all resources in the energy market doesn't appropriately reflect the scarcity value of the marginal unit. FERC also conducted a series of 3 workshops to explore possible improvements in market design and operational practices in order to ensure appropriate price formation in energy and ancillary services markets. Finally, last November, FERC, recognizing the importance of fuel assurance to reliability, ordered the RTOs to report within 90 days on the status of their efforts to address market and system performance associated with fuel assurance issues. These initiatives at FERC are a remarkably swift response to the market conditions that are placing certain nuclear units and other baseload capacity at risk, and it is obviously all to the good for the operating nuclear plants, since fuel assurance is one of those attributes that, in our opinion, deserves compensation and currently doesn't get it. In April, at FERC's conference on the polar vortex, a PJM executive suggested that the RTO might be coming back to FERC with changes to its tariff to reflect the value of fuel assurance. By December, PJM had requested FERC's approval of a new capacity performance product to drive greater reliability. In exchange for meeting higher performance standards, qualifying generators like nuclear power plants would receive increased capacity payments. The point here is not that the problem is solved or that work underway has yet relieved the economic stress facing some of our operating nuclear units. The point is that federal regulators, state officials, and the RTOs now clearly recognize the problem exists and are moving to develop solutions. It is a significant evolution in thinking in a relatively short period of time, and we look forward to continuing progress because there is no time to lose. As you know, we have nuclear plants operating at a loss as we speak. I said earlier that 2014 was all about recognizing the value of these assets, and my eyes bug me sometimes, in the recent series of reports to the Illinois State Legislature, from various state agencies provide dramatic proof of that value. According to analysis conducted by PJM for the Illinois Commerce Commission, if Byron, Quad Cities, and Clinton retired prematurely, load payments would increase between $307 million and $437 million in the ComEd zone, and between $752 million and $1.3 billion in PJM overall, and that is a one-year impact. PJM also confirmed in its analysis that the system would be unreliable in 2019 under all retirement scenarios studied, with significant thermal and voltage violations that would require substantial time to correct. These impacts generally comport with our own analyses of nuclear power stations at risk. In Illinois, losing all 5 reactors at risk would eliminate 2,500 direct jobs, those people working at the plants. Total job losses, direct and indirect, in the first year would be 9,000. The direct impact economic value lost in the first year would be $2.4 billion. Add to this another $1.2 billion in indirect economic value in Illinois. That is the value created in the counties and state from having the plants there, and those losses ripple through time year after year. Let me turn now to the Environmental Protection Agency's proposed rule to reduce carbon emissions from existing coal-fired plants, which focused attention on another valuable attribute of nuclear energy. EPA proposal is designed to reduce carbon emissions by 30% from 2005 levels to 2030. And that goal simply cannot be achieved, and I'll repeat, cannot be achieved without preserving the nuclear power plants that provide approximately 20% of America's electricity and 63% of Americans' carbon-free electricity. EPA's proposal recognizes this fact and attempts, though poorly, to provide states with an incentive to preserve existing nuclear generating plants. In order to preserve existing nuclear capacity, NEI urged EPA to consider requiring states to demonstrate in their state implementation plans how they intend to preserve their nuclear plants. For regulated states, that would be a relatively straightforward showing. For states with competitive markets, it could require for the state to commit to policy changes or other mechanisms to preserve their nuclear capacity. In addition, we believe that power uprates and license renewals should be considered new capacity and count towards compliance as an incentive to preserve and expand existing nuclear generating capacity. EPA also proposed to include output from the 5 nuclear plants under construction in the rate-setting formula, as though they were already operating at 90% capacity factors. This is just wrong and unacceptable. Adding potential output from these plants to the rate-setting formula reduced the state's intensity target significantly, thereby penalizing those states that are taking actions to significantly reduce their carbon emissions. NEI does not believe output from the nuclear units under construction should be part of the rate-setting calculation, although they obviously should count towards compliance when they begin operating. To wrap up our discussion of the policy and business environment, we believe we now have an opportunity to address the problems and shortcomings as we see them in the market. Compared to last year at this time, when many policymakers were unaware of the challenges facing our nuclear generating assets, the FERC, EPA, RTOs, and many states now recognize the value of well-performing nuclear power plants and the consequences of allowing them to shut down. We also see growing recognition that the solution to shortcomings in the capacity and energy markets is to monetize the valuable attributes of the various sources of electricity, including nuclear energy, and to address the issues that inhibit appropriate price formation in the energy markets. The industry will continue to work with all stakeholders to ensure that nuclear plants receive all appropriate compensation for the value they provide. Turning now to some of the key events and activities from 2014. First, plant performance. Nuclear generation in 2014 was 1.2% higher than 2013. According to our estimate, the fleet operated at an all-time record capacity factor of 91.9%. We won't have the 2014 cost data until mid-year, but in 2013, U.S. nuclear plants operated at about $41 per megawatt hour on average, a 9% decrease from $45 per megawatt hour in 2012. You can see in the bar chart on the right that the first quartile operated below $28 per megawatt hour. That is total generating costs, which includes fuel, operating and maintenance costs, and capital. Fuel costs in 2013 were up slightly, operating costs were down slightly, and capital spending down significantly. We invested $6.4 billion in the plants in 2013, a 25% decrease from the $8.6 billion in CapEx the year before. When you combine the $2.2 billion reduction in CapEx between 2012 and 2013 and suspension of the nuclear waste fee, which I'll discuss a little later, we've taken about $3 billion out of the nuclear industry's cost structure in the last 2 years. Here's a snapshot of the CapEx numbers broken down into 4 major categories. Almost 1/2 of total CapEx in 2013 went to spending on power uprates, steam generator replacements, vessel head replacements, and other items necessary for operation beyond 40 years. Routine replacement equipment accounted for about 1/4 of the total and has been relatively flat over the last several years. CapEx associated with compliance with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's regulations and requirements was also about 1/4 of the total, and that has increased significantly in the last 10 years. In fact, regulatory CapEx has roughly doubled since 2005. This is a source of concern, and we are working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on several major initiatives designed to ensure maximum efficiency from capital and O&M spending imposed by the regulatory process. We cannot afford to let spending to meet regulatory requirements of low safety significance crowd out more important industry-driven safety initiatives that would make measurable improvements to safety and reliability. Addressing the cumulative impact of NRC's regulatory actions and self-imposed industry requirements is one of our highest priorities, made more urgent, obviously, by the economic stress facing some of our plants. The industry will always invest what is necessary to ensure safety and reliability. We will always do that. But over the years, the number of regulatory requirements has increased, including some 60 agency rulemaking proposals now under consideration. The companies that operate nuclear plants must devote resources to comply with these requirements, some of which do little to enhance safety. As in any other business, managers at nuclear plants have a finite resources and must make decisions about what activities to perform. Regulatory activities are traditionally given top priority. That means other work may be deferred, even if the work being deferred has greater safety benefit. The industry believes that activities with the greatest safety benefit should be scheduled first, regardless of who's initiated them. We are developing tools to address these issues. Last summer, 6 nuclear plants pilot tested a new methodology that aggregates NRC-driven and plant-initiated activities and ranks them based on safety importance. All of the plants identified actions of low safety significance, including regulatory actions. That has been scheduled ahead of actions with significantly higher safety importance. With further refinements, the industry hopes to use this approach to ensure that the most safety important projects are completed first. The U.S. nuclear industry has an enviable safety record. In the most recent 15 years of reporting to Congress on its operations, the NRC licensed facilities, the agency, the NRC, has identified only 4 incidents deemed significant enough to mention as abnormal occurrences. The safety record is not consistent with a doubling of regulatory CapEx over the last 10 years. As you know, we have 5 reactors under construction. Unit 2 at the Tennessee Valley Authority Watts Bar Station will be the first to reach commercial operation. TVA estimates Watts Bar 2 will be completed between September 2015 and June 2016, with a most likely completion date of December 2015, and an expected cost between $4 billion and $4.5 billion. Last December, TVA completed cold hydrostatic testing, which verified that welds, joints, pipes, and other components do not leak and will hold pressure. The final pressure test was successfully conducted in mid-December. The next major milestone at Watts Bar 2 will be hot functional testing, when the entire nuclear system will be heated to operating temperature and pressure. The new plant projects in Georgia and South Carolina achieved several major milestones over the past year. At Southern Nuclear Operating Company's Vogtle Unit 3 and Scanner's VC Summer Unit 2, workers have installed the CA-20 module. This is part of the auxiliary building that is located outside and adjacent to the containment vessel. It will house various plant components, including a useful storage area. The CA-20 is considered a supermodule because it is too large to transport and requires assembly on site. The CA-05 module also has been installed at both of these reactors. It consists of reinforced steel plates that will be filled with concrete to provide structural support for the containment building. This module weighs 180,000 pounds and is housed in the containment building. At Vogtle 4 and Summer 3, workers installed the 920,000-pound cradle on which the containment vessel bottom head will rest. They installed a 1.8 million-pound bottom head about 3 months later. Several steps remain in the construction of the containment vessel for each reactor. After the bottom head is in place, 3 massive rings will be placed on top of it, each fabricated with multiple levels of steel plates. The lower ring is in place at both VC Summer Unit 2 and Vogtle Unit 3. The component weighs 1.9 million pounds and measures more than 50 feet tall. With all 3 rings are in place, the containment vessel will be capped with the top head. The completed containment vessel will weigh about 4,000 tons, stand more than 200 feet high, with a 130-foot diameter. Let me also remind you that we continue to develop a pipeline of potential new projects, options that can be exercised in the future when needed. Last year, the NRC completed its safety review of the GE Hitachi Advanced ESBWR design and certified that design as ready for market. It is the reactor of choice for Dominion Resources and DTE Energy. DTE recently completed the final hearing on its license for Fermi Unit 3, the last step before NRC issues the combined construction and operating license. We have 10 reactors, 12,500 megawatts in active licensing now at the NRC. As you know, obtaining a combined construction and operating license is a non-trivial task and is expensive at $150 million to $200 million. With 69 nuclear reactors currently under construction around the world and 183 new nuclear plant projects in the licensing and advanced planning stage, commercial opportunities for U.S. vendors and suppliers are found increasingly in international markets. Competition for this market is fierce, but U.S. industry is well positioned. American companies have the most advanced and innovative technologies and designs. Whether the advanced passive safety design for large reactors or the small modular reactors now being developed, which may be particularly appropriate for developing economies. The commercial opportunity is large, but strategic national objectives are also in play here. If the United States participates successfully in the world market, we strengthen our ability to influence nonproliferation policy and practices. If U.S. companies are not in the market, the U.S. government does not have the same seat at the table when policies are made. For several years, NEI has encouraged the U.S. government to pursue a comprehensive civil nuclear trade policy that recognizes that nuclear energy is a strategic industry and also an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, and enables commercial nuclear suppliers to compete effectively in international markets. We continue to implement safety improvements to address lessons learned from the accident at Fukushima in 2011. The centerpiece of the U.S. industry response, as we've told you in the past, is a strategy called FLEX, which will provide the greatest safety benefit in the shortest period of time. The FLEX approach adds equipment, pumps, generators, and the like at diverse locations around the plant site. The strategy is flexible by design. It requires that the plant sites obtain, prepare, and maintain portable equipment that can connect to a variety of locations for injecting coolant and providing a continuous supply of electricity. FLEX will mitigate those extreme, unexpected scenarios that are beyond the plant's design parameters. The objective is to ensure capability to cope for an indefinite period through a combination of installed plant systems and equipment, portable on-site equipment, and off-site resources. Our FLEX strategy has become the benchmark worldwide for managing extreme challenges. In addition to having the equipment pre-staged at all 61 sites, last year we opened 2 centers for additional critical equipment. The centers are located near Memphis and Phoenix and are capable of delivering supplemental emergency equipment to any of America's nuclear power plants within 24 hours, enabling them to manage an extended loss of electrical power and/or cooling water supply. Each response center has 5 identical sets of equipment which undergo regular testing to assure its functionality. All of the flex equipment at the plant sites and at the regional centers is similar and compatible. For example, all the equipment features standardized fittings to allow us to use it at any nuclear plant in the United States. The $40 million startup cost for each regional facility and annual operating costs of about $4 million are being shared by all the companies that operate reactors. Let me turn now to used fuel. Until last year, the federal used fuel program had been in suspended animation after the Obama administration halted the NRC's review of the Yucca Mountain license application and disbanded the Department of Energy's Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management. We joined with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners and others in separate lawsuits to restart the NRC licensing process and stop collection of the nuclear waste fee. Last year, the appeals court instructed the Secretary of Energy to set the nuclear waste fee to 0, given the absence of a DOE program and until such time as the DOE has implemented a new program or fully resumed the Yucca Mountain program. In May of last year, the waste fee went to 0, which saves the industry over $750 million per year. We do not expect the fee to be reinstated anytime soon. In 2013, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals also ordered the NRC to resume its review of the Yucca Mountain license application. Just last month, the NRC issued the so-called safety evaluation reports, which indicates, as expected, that Yucca Mountain can be used to dispose safely of used fuel. This is not the end of the licensing process. The adjudicatory phase to address contentions must be completed when NRC and DOE receive additional funding from Congress. As we've told you many times before, the program must be restructured. We need to complete licensing for the Yucca Mountain facility, and if licensed, move forward with the project as required by the law and the court decision. We must create a new management entity to assume DOE's responsibility and to bring private sector project management, discipline, and capabilities to the project. The new management entity must have access to future waste fee revenues and the $30 billion plus currently in the Nuclear Waste Fund. And we must site and operate an interim consolidated storage facility in a willing host community and state until such time as the permanent disposal site is available. An interim consolidated storage facility would allow the federal government to begin meeting its contractual obligations to remove used fuel from our sites, starting with fuel currently stored at shutdown reactors. We are also preparing to operate our plants beyond the 60-year license that many of them have received today. As you know, our plants are licensed initially to operate for 40 years. To date, 75 reactors have received a first 20-year license renewal. 17 reactors have filed application for renewal and are under review at NRC, and the remaining 8 reactors have announced their intention to apply. 13 reactors have passed the 40-year mark and are operating safely and reliably with their renewed licenses. By 2030, several nuclear reactors in the U.S. will have been generating electricity for 60 years, and by 2040, half of the nation's nuclear fleet will have turned 60. Some of this capacity will likely seek a second license renewal to operate beyond 60. The regulatory process here is well established. Active equipment and components that are replaced regularly, like pumps, valves, instrumentation, are managed under the so-called maintenance rule. The other category of equipment is more passive stuff, long-lived components. These include the containment building, reactor vessel, tanks, concrete piping, electrical cables. And for plants operating beyond the original 40-year license, the effects of aging this equipment is subject to what's called an aging management program to identify, monitor, and manage the effects of aging. The industry, in cooperation with EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, the Department of Energy, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is conducting extensive research and development that will allow the industry to manage aging issues safely during a second 20-year license renewal period. We're in the process of identifying lead plants to demonstrate the process for second license renewal and expect to have them identified next year. Although some of our nuclear plants will seek a second license renewal to operate past 60 years, some will not. Additional capital investment will almost certainly be required to operate past 60, and in some cases, market conditions, or other factors may not justify that capital investment. Just over 30,000 megawatts reach 60 years before 2035. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, if today's nuclear plants retire at 60 years of operation, given load growth expected by the Energy Information Administration, 22,000 megawatts of new nuclear generating capacity would be needed by 2030, and 55,000 by 2035 just to maintain nuclear at 20% of our U.S. electricity supply. If the reactors operate to 80 years, 18,000 megawatts of new nuclear capacity would be needed by 2030, and 23,000 by 2035 to maintain the 20% share. I want to leave you with some thoughts about electricity policy and the increasingly urgent need for a constructive national debate and action over an integrated energy and environmental policy. Before I do that, a few thoughts about our political priorities this year in Congress and in the states. As you know, we have a new Congress with Republican majorities in both. We've seen energy issues move up the congressional agenda, but it remains to be seen if Congress and the administration can make progress on issues as complex as energy policy. We know the House leadership will make used fuel a priority, and for the first time in several years, some in the Senate leadership want the opportunity to consider used fuel legislation as well. As I said earlier, restructuring the management and funding of the new program is an imperative, as well as going forward with the current program. We'll continue to work with the appropriators to ensure sufficient funding for nuclear energy research and development, including the money necessary to complete the design and licensing work for small modular reactors. We'll continue to encourage constructive oversight of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the appointment of qualified commissioners. The Export-Import Bank is operating under a short-term extension of its charter, which expires in June of this year. Ex-Im financing is extremely important to American nuclear suppliers operating overseas. In fact, Ex-Im financing is usually a bid spec in nuclear tenders. Ex-Im bank authorization is proving to be a struggle, though we do believe there is strong support in both houses of Congress. If a vote was brought to the floor, we think it would pass, and we're working hard to do that, along with a large coalition of other industries. We also have two major agreements for nuclear cooperation coming up for renewal this year. One is China, and one is South Korea. These agreements are necessary for commercial nuclear exports from the United States. The agreements are negotiated by the State Department, submitted to Congress, and enter into force automatically unless Congress passes and the President signs a resolution of disapproval. These two agreements represent thousands of jobs in America and billions of dollars in business for American suppliers, so we will be working hard to make sure nothing interrupts that trade opportunity. For the last several years, the states have been more effective in setting constructive energy policy than the federal government. We are building 4 new reactors in Georgia and South Carolina because both states provide a statutory framework and the regulatory support necessary to finance these large infrastructure projects. This year, like you, we'll be watching Illinois particularly closely. The report commissioned by the Illinois legislature last year listed several market-based approaches to provide appropriate value for the plants at risk. They included a clean energy portfolio standard, potentially joining a regional cap-and-trade program like the RGGI thing, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, and a carbon tax. As I said earlier, the Nuclear Matters campaign will be focused this year on states where we have nuclear plants under stress. Last year, we focused on raising awareness of the economic stress facing some of the nuclear plants. This year, we'll focus on solutions. In addition, we work closely with state-based organizations like the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, and others. And that work will obviously continue this year. Let me close with some thoughts on challenges facing our nation that really cry out for attention. We work in an industry with long latencies. Think about it. The world we're living in today is a product of decisions made 15 to 20 years ago when the 1992 Energy Policy Act opened access to transmission systems, when roughly 1/2 of the states decided to restructure the electricity business, create competitive markets, and establish renewable portfolio standards. The world we'll inherit in the 2030s will be a product of decisions we make in the next several years. And there are some serious policy issues that really must be addressed. For example, America's generating technology options are narrowing dramatically. Coal-fired generation capacity is declining. The U.S. has roughly 300,000 megawatts of coal-fired capacity, and about 60,000 megawatts of that will shut down by 2020 because of tighter limits on SO2, NOx, mercury, and air toxics. EPA's proposed regulation to reduce carbon emissions would lead to an additional 40 to 45,000 megawatts of coal-fired retirements, and the pipeline of coal-fired projects under development is all but empty. Natural gas-fired generating capacity continues to grow dramatically. Since 1995, the United States has built approximately 342,000 megawatts of gas-fired capacity, or approximately 75% of all capacity additions, and that trend continues. While gas is clearly part of our nation's strength in energy resources, over-reliance on gas could expose consumers of natural gas and electricity to price volatility and, maybe more important, loss of reliability. Renewables will play an increasingly large role, but as intermittent sources, they cannot displace the need for baseload generating capacity, absent dramatic advances in energy storage. So the U.S. electricity sector is losing one of its major strengths, fuel and technology diversity. If current trends continue, that diversity is seriously at risk. This diversity is taken for granted and, as a result, undervalued, as IHS CERA demonstrated in a recent analysis commissioned by NEI, the Edison Electric Institute, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. IHS compared a base case reflecting the current generation mix in regional U.S. power systems during the 2010 to 2012 period with a reduced diversity case. IHS found that the cost of generating electricity in the reduced diversity case was more than $93 billion higher per year. Retail electricity prices were 25% higher. The typical household's annual disposable income was about $2,100 less, and the negative impacts would be similar to an economic downturn, was IHS's conclusion. We discussed earlier the fact that the first of our nuclear plants begin to reach 60 years of operation in the late 20s. What we also need to be mindful of what's going on outside the nuclear sector. In 2030, of today's 300 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity, only 23,000 megawatts will be less than 25 years old. Same story, different numbers for today's gas-fired capacity. So it seems to us that we're looking at replacement of a significant amount of our generating capacity, not just nuclear, between now and the 2030s. Financing the sizable nuclear construction program that we think will be necessary in the 2020s remains a challenge, so developing workable finance approaches is an important going forward as it was when the Energy Policy Act was enacted in 2005. Targeted revisions to the Atomic Energy Act are necessary to produce a more stable, more efficient licensing process and to really incorporate lessons learned during the licensing and construction of the new Vogtle and Summer projects. The used fuel program must be set on a sustainable course. A workable regulatory framework for second license renewal is a strategic imperative for our industry and our country. So is commercial deployment of small modular reactors. Although dates like 2030 and 2040 seem like a far distant future, particularly when we are preoccupied with the next election or the next quarterly earnings report, in the world of electric power planning, 2030 is not far away. The runway to that future starts now, and we are doing everything we can to persuade the policy community, the political system to engage on these issues, and as they do so, to fully recognize nuclear energy's unique value proposition. With that, my thanks again for you joining us this morning, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you all have.
Costs of running an existing nuclear power plant. Would you make a rough estimate of what the total cost of running a new plant would be, given what you know now? And also, since cost of capital is so important a component, how do you set the cost of capital on this particular type of facility?
Okay. I'm going to answer your question a different way than you asked it, because I'm not going to try and run numbers and we don't. So Southern Company, and most of you in this room listen to the earnings reports, hear Tom Fanning repeat over and over again that Vogtle, with cost increases that they're seeing and other things is the best deal for their customers by about $2 billion. Okay? So I know financing is a real challenge, and obviously as community thinks about financing. When you look at a nuclear plant, and you know this, Lynn, you're looking at a 60-year asset, okay? And what the customer pays is the price of electricity. They don't pay the capital cost, they pay a price of electricity. And both Southern and SCANA are both still saying very convincingly that their projects are the best deal for their customers, ignoring what we might do in carbon space, which might make everything more expensive beyond what they're already calculating. So my advocacy would be, look at a nuclear plant from the standpoint of price of electricity over a long period of time, as opposed to, yeah, it's got a high capital cost. Because I'm going to depreciate the capital cost, I'm going to get very good price stability, and I'm going to have a plant that, at least in regulated states where they do integrated resource planning and they do look at it that way, you would conclude is actually a good deal for your customers. And again, that's absent knowing how we're going to end up on carbon in our country.
Thank you, Marv. With regard to the EPA's carbon initiative, you hear some discussion that the courts are going to eviscerate this rule, maybe eliminate it. Hear talk that maybe Republican Congress will pass some legislation that will moot the whole issue of EPA's jurisdiction over carbon. Do you see any prospects for any of those, or do you think that we're going to have a rule in some form like what we're seeing now?
I think there's prospects for all three of the things you said. I think without question the administration is going to publish a rule later this summer. I don't think there's any question. I think without question states have already gone to court, so there will be court challenges to it. Obviously, and I've sat with Gina McCarthy, and Gina and her people say, we think our rule is going to be legal. It may not be exactly the rule we put out as a draft, but they are planning to fight it in court. The history is you don't get a stay, usually, on this type of stuff, so you're going to be dealing with uncertainty on what the courts may decide, but no question they'll be going to court. I think that in Congress there will obviously be some move, even though recently I saw a statement by Chairman Lisa Murkowski, who chairs the Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees EPA's budget, that she wanted to get a budget out for them, and she did not want to have any riders that were going to be poison pills to the budget. Also, Chairman Upton is moving an energy bill, and he wants to have an energy bill that the president can sign. So I don't expect there'll be riders there. That doesn't mean there won't be movement in Congress trying to do something. But again, you got to have something the president can't veto, or veto-proof, and I think that's doubtful that they could do that. But again, I don't doubt that there may not be legislation. Other questions?
Based on your activities in Illinois and what you're hearing or seeing out there, any initial read on where you think the legislature is at in terms of dealing with the nuclear, and if there's a particular option that seems to be gathering more favor than others?
It's a good question. It's an honest answer. I'm not close enough to the discussions to know if they've got a priority. But I think that what we're seeing, and in talking with my friends that are maybe closer a little bit, the legislature is very interested, as is the governor, because the impacts are so severe. I mean, the best thing to do is fix the markets. And if you can't fix the markets fast, then you need to look at other things. We believe you shouldn't have renewable portfolio standards. We believe you should have clean energy standards. That the intent ought to be to have less carbon, less pollution, not just renewables. So we think you should, wherever you have a renewable, we think you should have a clean energy standard, and nuclear should be a player, as should hydro and other things that could play in it. I know one of the recommendations that they made was to form something like a RGGI, and they may want to look at that even in trying to satisfy 111D. because that may be one way of dealing with the question of how do I actually implement under 111D. But to your specific, do I know if they got a first choice? I don't. I just think it's great that they're actually seriously looking to do something so that Exelon can make the right decisions on those plants, because they're very good operating plants.
Hi, Mark. It sounds like there's a lot of regulatory focus on expediting the license renewal process and other processes and increasing the safety measures of nuclear energy, but what obstacles and backlash do you anticipate this industry to face?
Do you mean in regulatory space on those issues, or?
Just in general, like the biggest things that come to mind, even beyond regulatory.
It's interesting. We had our executive committee meeting yesterday, and Carol Browner, who many of you know, was the longest-serving administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, was President Obama's initial energy and environmental czar. Carol is part of our leadership council for nuclear matters. And Carol is getting, at times, nasty emails, I think, from colleagues in the environmental community. And Carol's position is very clear. The biggest threat our world faces, in her mind, is climate change. You can't deal with it without having a robust nuclear program that's obviously got to be safe and reliable. And her advocacy is we need to make sure we have that, and we need to make sure the U.S. plays a leadership role from a safety standpoint everywhere. I think some of the backlash that we get is because people don't understand, and they're not connecting dots. Carol didn't say it quite that way yesterday, but almost. She said that she's having a lot of success talking with people, first of all, because she's very credible and she's very smart, but also because she said, once you state the facts, people understand. It's almost 2/3 of America's non-emitting source. So I think that there are anti-nuclear groups, and I look at them the same way as I look at my companies. They're a business, okay? They're not, I mean, some of them are very idealistic, but fundamentally, they're trying to raise funds. So the thing they would like is to have plants shut down and us start to move fuel, because they'd raise a lot of money about the fact that we're transporting used fuel. The last thing they want is everything shut down, because then they're out of business, because that's not good for business for them. So there's an anti-nuclear community. We don't spend a lot of time on them because we're not going to convince them. There's environmental communities where we want to spend a lot of time. There's policy think tanks. And generally what we find is if we can get them the facts and we can have people, sometimes it's not us, deliver them credibly, we can make tremendous progress. Maybe not where they're willing to stand up and support nuclear, but they stop opposing it. Because to get some groups to stand up and support it, you've got to get a crowd, because they don't want to be alone. However, when you look at our public opinion, our public opinion support is very good. It's in the 66, 67% range. We get very good support, and the polls are good. We get tremendous support around our sites. There it's up in the 85% range, and that's not polling the workers that work at the sites. And whenever we've had a bill go through Congress that had nuclear stuff in it, we had very strong bipartisan support. We have very vocal critics like Ed Markey and Barbara Boxer and Senator Reid, but we have large bannions of support both in the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats. So, I'm not sure that really answers your question, but that's sort of the situation analysis, the way I would describe it.
Oh, no, that helps a lot. I just want to know what things Carol's saying to convince everyone, of the facts, so then I can pitch it out to all my friends, too.
Okay.
So, thank
That's
you.
great.
Any observations you can share on modular nuclear, its potential competitive threat here and/or its ability to capture international market share that you described earlier?
I mean, I actually believe that small modular reactors have a very, very good future complementary to our advanced light water reactors that we currently have, both here and overseas. The overseas market could be extremely large because if you're a developing country, you don't have a large grid. Putting an 1,100 megawatt or a 1,500 megawatt unit up might just consume your grid. Putting up SMRs allows you to grow with it. Domestically, investor-owned utilities have an interest. It may be the only way we can build in competitive markets. Okay? I think in still regulated markets, like the Southeast, large reactors, really have a tremendous future. Competitive markets, it is hard to see us building a $9 billion large reactor. So SMRs might be the way we can build in competitive markets. And the other thing that I found over probably the last 3 years now is that the rural electric co-ops and the public power folks are very, very interested in small modular reactors. And I think some of that is because they're either in regions where they don't have, anybody wanting to build a big nuclear plant. They burn a lot of coal, and they're looking out over the horizon and saying, I may not be able to do that so well. So SMRs look good. They probably wouldn't operate them. They'd hire Exelon or Southern or Entergy or someone else, but there's a lot of interest in those two. Now, the timing is still probably in the 2022 to 2025 timeframe. If you could turbocharge that, if you could get kind of things moving faster, I think it would be better, because I think we're going to have competition from Korea and Japan and the Russians, and probably the French too, who also are all looking at SMRs. So from America's standpoint, I'd like us to go faster at getting products to market. But I think that there are markets both domestically and internationally that could be very robust.
Hi, good morning. Just two questions. Just first on cybersecurity, could you address that and kind of where the industry is on that, and specifically what type of CapEx per nuclear plant we may be looking at
For cyber?
For cyber, and then I have a follow-up.
Okay. On cyber, every one of our plants has a, quote, cyber security plan. They have a security plan, and they have a specific cyber security plan. Regulated by the NRA, by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they have taken cyber very seriously, and all the plants have put in protection, which I can't go into in any detail, to make sure that neither from outside or from inside could you do something from a safety standpoint. Okay? There's also obviously a lot going on that affects our plants, both from what NERC is doing for cyber protection from a grid standpoint and from a substation standpoint and a switchyard standpoint. From a cost, I don't have a number. We just petitioned the NRC with a rulemaking to modify their cyber rule, because what they're doing is and I shouldn't say what they're doing. What they've corrected was a problem in that they were treating every digital asset like it was of equal importance. Now, the company may consider certain digital assets very important from a reliability and a performance standpoint. The NRC should only consider whether it's got safety significance. And there's very few digital assets in our plants that have safety significance. It is very limited. Okay, despite what you see in the movies and hear on TV, you can't get control of a nuclear power plant from outside and cause it to go out of control. Okay, one of the sort of good news, bad news story with our plants is the good news is that because we have so many analog systems, digital's not a problem. The bad news is we ought to be getting off the analog systems and going more digital. I don't have a number on capital. We don't expect it to be a big number, to be honest with you. We've spent a fortune on security, for physical security. Because of the nature of the digital assets that have safety significance, we don't see that as a large capital investment for us if it's managed correctly.
And then my second question is around Vogtle and Summer. Are the delays being caused there more regulatory in nature?
I think they're litigating that, so I'm going to not add weight to one end or the other end of the scale, because I think that's part of the litigation. And to be completely honest, unless in a previous life I used to do a lot of work looking at prudency evaluations, and unless you've actually done a real in-depth dig into the timeline and what caused what, you probably don't know, because what you're getting is what's in the newspapers. And that's not necessarily accurate for what really happened. So I don't have, there's obviously some regulatory issues on the timing for when you assume certain things would happen. And we see a lot of lessons learned with the regulator, which I think the regulator would agree with, to make the next units a much more efficient process. This was the first time through on Part 52, and I think everybody on both sides was learning what that meant. Any call? Yeah, they're coming to you.
It seems to me from listening to you today and listening to the EEI folks,
Remember, I'm your friend. You got to be nice now.
I'm always nice, you know. From listening to you today and from listening to the EEI folks yesterday, that there's no question that this is going to be a price increase industry. Delivering electricity is going to cost more in the future than it's going to cost today. I assume that Carol Browner is faced with that when she talks to people and has to have some answers to the questions. How much more? And when? And what do you do about it? How do you prep the people who are complaining already about the lack of the price increases that are happening everywhere else and the so-called income inequality situation, etc.? Are you more able to pay for electricity when you need it most?
It's a good question and a great observation, so I'll give you my feeling. I think electricity is absolutely critical to survival. It's the lifeblood of your economy, and it's essential for human survival. Go places where they don't have electricity and see what's going on, okay? In our country, and probably in many others, but certainly in our country, we take it for granted. It's like air, it's always there. The only two times I think Americans think of electricity is when it's not there or their bill goes up. Both are bad, okay? What EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, is doing, and to be honest, it's something that a number of us have talked about for years, is they're really working to get a better appreciation of the value of electricity. So recently retired CEO from a big utility had proposed to me one time that what he wanted to do was run ads, and he was not trying to pick on Starbucks, he was just trying to put it in perspective, which said, on average today, Americans spent X dollars at Starbucks for a latte or whatever they were going to pick, and that amount that you spent at Starbucks from an electricity standpoint brought you the following things this month from electricity, okay? And get people to appreciate it. So I think, Carl, one thing is we got to get to appreciate. The cost of electricity today in real terms is probably not much more than it was in 1970, okay? The cost of everything else in real terms is a hell of a lot more. So one, we haven't done a very good job on educating about it, but your question's still valid. Part of my point was non-nuclear. It was we're going to be rebuilding a lot of our infrastructure. And that is going to raise the price of electricity. And you need to prepare the public utility commissioners for how to do that. What you don't want to do is have it all fall at one time, because what we do is what we're doing with highways. We wait and we wait and we wait, and then we have to do it. And all of a sudden we're funding everything in a crisis manner. So the sooner everybody can start to look at this, maybe more realistically, the better it will be. On Vogtle, again, I think Tom, in his recent calls, I think, has continued to emphasize that the rate increase, because they have construction work in progress, which we think is actually a smart thing because it moderates the rate increase, their rate increase is going to be on the order of 6 to 8%. Okay, sounds like a lot. It's not a lot relative to what people pay for everything else. But all of this will compound itself and be a much bigger problem if you don't. Now, in competitive markets, our point is that the decisions you're making now, the way they're playing the energy market, okay, with uplift and things out of sequence, and maybe we'll fix capacity markets, but it's not clear yet. But I think PJM's trying to go in the right direction with their capacity performance proposal. If you don't fix those markets, you shut down plants, you have to replace them. That's more expensive than the current operating plants. Okay, so you actually, by trying to keep costs low or not making the market work efficiently, which would cause the price to go up. I mean, if I don't do uplift, everybody sees price increase. Okay? Not just the guy that I'm favoring. Everybody goes, because it goes to the market price then. And everybody would gain from more money and people would pay more across the thing. If you don't do that and the plant's shut down, the price is higher ultimately for the customers because I got to build new. So if I make the markets work right, I am going to have slightly higher energy prices. It's a fact in energy. It will be short-term higher, but long-term lower than what's going to happen if I don't fix the energy markets. So that's the thing that is hard for politicians to do. It may even be hard for RTOs to do because of the stakeholder process. But they're not helping their customers for the long term with the way they work now. And we as a country are not helping Americans for the long term if we basically forestall dealing with, you know, what we're going to have, you know, over the next 20 or 30 years. We are going to replace an awful lot of generation. And I know everybody thinks the sun is free and the wind is free, but unless we get storage, the sun is free and the wind is free and the electricity is only there part-time. So it's a great question. It's a challenge. It's like dealing with entitlements. At some point, you got to deal with it. Other questions?
One over here, following up on the pricing issue, when you talked about fuel increases in 2013, what is your views on the price of uranium fuel going forward the next 20, 30 years?
I'd never try and predict uranium price in the next 20 or 30 years. If you run a hedge fund, you're going to buy. Just on the front end on uranium, because of Fukushima and the shutdown of all the Japanese plants, which hopefully some will start to come online this year, we hope, and the decision by Germany, there is a glut of uranium that people either have in inventory or are producing. So uranium prices obviously had come down because of that. Eventually, what's going to happen is the plants are going to restart. I think people think that you can just go out and develop a new property because now there's a demand. Well, it takes them a decade to probably develop a new uranium mine of any significance. So I think what we're going to see is the producers planning as they see demand pick up both internationally. I mean, China's going to build a lot of plants. Their demand will go up even though they bought uranium mines in places. So my expectation would be we're going to see uranium prices eventually go up. How high they go up, I don't think they're going to go like they did when there was a lot of hedge fund activity doing what they could do very well because it was very easy to see what was going to happen with uranium just by listening to a few calls. So price will go up. I don't think it's going to go out of sight. But you need demand to come back first because of the inventories that everybody has.
Mark, considering all the scenarios and all this, I would say, risks that you have about the acceptance, the price increase, what do you see is the market share of nuclear energy by 2030 after the let's say, a successful position in terms of a carbon-constrained environment in the United States?
I mean, we're advocating, as you can see from some of the numbers, we just stuck at 20. We think 20 should be the minimum. We think it, depending upon what we do with carbon, it's going to drive, you know, either great breakthroughs in energy storage, some new technologies, and, you know, we can go to microgrids and other things, but we got a 4 trillion kilowatt hour demand in this country. It's hard to put that into small microgrids very quickly. So we think you're going to have to build more nuclear plants. That's why I mentioned second license renewal as an imperative. I have no illusions or delusions that every plant will go for a second license renewal. It won't make economic sense for some. But we've got to make sure it works, both from a safety and a technical standpoint, and then from the economic and the regulatory certainty standpoint, so that we can do that. But we're going to have to build more plants. And our goal right now, it's in our vision statement, is to go for at least 20% and stay there. Demand in the country is slow. So, you know, that's one of the things we're seeing. Efficiency is working very good in our country. This is not all recession related. It's a lot of efficiency improvements are helping keep demand growth down. So, you know, that is a good thing for America. But we would see it at least 20%, and depending upon what you do with carbon, it could have to be more, again, if you don't have breakthroughs in some other stuff, because again, I don't know how we don't like not having electricity in this country. Okay, it's not a good day when the lights are out and the air conditioning isn't working, and in the winter it's even worse because people could die. You know, and that was the problem with the polar vortex, was that there was a real threat. I mean, it could happen in the summer too if it's extremely hot, but the winter is actually more dangerous in most cases. So we're trying to stay at least at 20. I think it could be more, and it depends a lot on carbon and on other technology breakthroughs. I mean, we're a pretty innovative country here, despite the fact we beat ourselves up sometimes.
Marvin?
And you got a train, right? Oh, there you are.
Could you address the concerns over an aging workforce in the industry? You know, just given the future you've outlined, are we going to have enough skilled people to kind of do all this, you know, from a construction and, you know, operational perspective? And, you know, I thought it might just be the headlines, but, you know, some of these delays are sort of driven by a lack of skilled labor, I thought.
Yeah, our building trades people would clearly disagree with that. That's a great question, and it's clearly something. I mean, it's not unique to the nuclear industry. It's my organization. It's across our world right now. We've been for probably close to a decade now. There's been a big effort on bringing young people in to the nuclear industry. And to be honest, it was helped immensely when the media decided we were having a renaissance. That was not our term, by the way. We actually didn't think we were going to get more than 4 to 8 units built by 2020, despite the fact that there were like 22 or so going for COLs, because we knew some of them were options and some of them depended upon what happened in demand. But the nuclear renaissance has resulted in us actually having a very strong cadre of young people, a young gen group, and the companies themselves are doing an awful lot on succession planning to try and move these young people into responsible places earlier. So I think the pipeline has been filled pretty good. We at NEI have worked with community colleges to create a program across, if I remember right, about 30 of them, where you could go and actually get qualified to be radiation protection health physicist, you know, or maintenance work or other things, and then you could work at any of our plants because we have a standard curriculum at these community colleges. One of the things that's hurt a little bit in the near term are the shutdowns. So the shutdown at Kewaunee, the shutdown at Songs, the shutdown at Crystal River, and now the shutdown at VY. It's actually made a lot of people available that have a lot of experience. And when I talk to some of the university folks and even the community college folks, they tell me, you know, we're having trouble placing some of our folks, which just a few years ago was almost a no-brainer, because you now have some excess people that the companies could not place within their own company that are getting jobs with other companies. But I think we're addressing this pretty well. And we do our annual meeting in Washington this year called the Nuclear Energy Assembly, and we do it jointly with the Young Gen meeting. And that's always an exciting time because you have, you know, 500 or 600 20s and 30-year-olds there who have more energy than, you know, a 10,000 megawatt site. And it helps us on the demographics, too, when we talk about the aging group that's at the meeting totally. So I think we're actually doing pretty well on that, as are the universities. Where we were losing universities, we now have seen that reverse, where we actually have more universities doing nuclear engineering. The government needs a lot of nuclear engineers because they have them at national labs and other places, and it's very important for them to get them because they have a very large aging problem, and we kind of try to coordinate with them. On the trade folks, we have a very good relationship with the building trades folks, and they are very bullish on wanting to do nuclear. Now, they just opened an office in Houston because, as you know, we're building lots of stuff in this country with low natural gas prices in the chemical industry, and they are really gearing up to do a lot of that. And I think that some of the time we lose some people maybe on our nuclear plants is because they're running off to other places. The other challenge we have, which is a good challenge, is we do outages so well now that they're no longer long-term job stability for folks because the outages are done very efficiently and they're short. And they're all done in a relatively concise window. So you can't make a living, you know, just saying I'm going to do a 6-month outage, you know, and then come back in the fall and do another 6-month outage and I'll make lots of money. So I think there we're also looking at what we can do, and the suppliers have been a big help there because they're helping to bring together people. So I don't want to dismiss it as an issue, but it's an issue that's getting lots and lots of attention. Did you say one more, Richard, or was this it? All right. Let me thank you all again for coming, and it's always a pleasure being with you. And please feel free to, you know, go on our website, call Richard or me if you have other questions, or, you know, hit any of our folks up. And again, thanks. Have a great day.